Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. A very warm welcome to today's session, Creating Access, Tools and Pathways for Transparency in Defense. I am Francesca Grandi. I'm your host today. I'm head of Transparency International's Defense and Security. It is really a pleasure to moderate our discussion with such esteemed colleagues. Today's session is part of the Europe Dialogue series organized by our partners at Open Government Partnership. Let me give the floor to Karina from OGP, who will briefly explain what this dialogue series is all about. Please, Karina, thank you.
Thanks so much, Francesca, and welcome everyone. Glad to see everyone here. So, as you might know, we started this OGP Europe Dialogue series in the beginning of 2025. So, this has become a series of webinars that are specifically designed for the European open government community, aiming to connect what happens on the EU level in the wider European regional policy priorities, and then really connecting them with national community, the processes and stakeholders that we have. So as a little recap, we started off in March with a webinar on advancing civic space and media freedom through the anti-SLAPP legislation. In June, we met on a topic called Making Algorithm Registers Work for Meaningful Transparency. And today, as you're here, you can see we are tackling another very important topic on defense. So I'm really glad that we got the chance to host this webinar together with our colleagues at TIDS. And for those of you who would like to use interpretation, I have put in the chat the guidelines on how to use Wordly. We use AI interpretation. If you scan the code here on the left, you will be able to access this. Highly recommend using this through your phone so you can actually get full transcripts of what has been said in your own language. Over back to you, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Karina. A really valuable initiative indeed. Thank you so much again for hosting us. So today's session is also marking the launch of TIDS Quick Start Guide to Access to Information in Defense. And this toolkit has been developed to support government, civil society, oversight bodies who have a stake and an interest in this topic, in navigating one of the most complex dilemma in the sector. How do we actually balance legitimate national security concerns on one side with the public right to information? And as many countries around the globe pledge to dramatically increase defense spending and accelerate procurement cycles, understanding this balance and applying it in a responsible way is really more important than ever. So today's conversation brings together three important perspectives around this central question. Those designing open government norms, those advising how to apply access to information in practice, and those implementing openness within defense institutions themselves. So we're really thrilled to have three exceptional speakers. Actually four, I'm sorry. Joseph Foti, Principal Advisor, Christina Socci, Senior Research Officer at the Open Government Partnership, Stephanie Trapnell, Senior Expert, Anti-Corruption Specialist, and lead author of the TIDS Toolkit, and last but not least, Kyrre Knudsen, Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Defense of Norway. Thank you so much all for joining us today. Let's jump straight into it. Joseph and Christina, I will start with you. OGP recently published a set of open government recommendations for defense and security, something many thought was too complex or too sensitive to address. Since open governance in defense inevitably looks different from other sectors, what advice does the guide offer to governments, civil society organizations that are trying to make the case for openness while navigating national security risks? So in other words, what does the guide include? How does it work? Who is it designed for? Please walk us through the new Open Government Guide on Defense.
Christine is going to start us off, I
Yes,
think.
great. Thank you all for attending. I want to do the first part just on what the guide is, how to use it effectively, and then Joe will go through some of the examples and just some key takeaways, particularly on these defense chapters. So first, again, thank you, Francesca. Again, this is what we'll be talking about. What is the Open Gov Guide? We like to think of it as a one-stop shop for recommendations, reform examples, and guidance for including international standards, so you can get everything you need in one place to know how to make these open government reforms on any given topic. So, for example, we cover everything from anti-corruption, civic space, climate and the environment, and of course, defense and security in our latest chapters, which were published back in September this year. So how to use the guide, I'm going to do a quick demo for you, but just as a brief overview of some of the more important sections, we have the evidence sections. When you first land on a chapter, you have this table of contents, you have a brief overview of what the topic is, why it matters, and you can look into the research, talking about the link between the reform we're talking about and positive trends. So you know why it matters. You know, that's really a big question that we don't want to forget to talk about in open government is why are we doing this? What's the point? And a lot of the times it's for efficiency, it's for better outcomes, it's improving trust with the public. So we want to just outline that for you so you have it in a handy spot. The biggest part of the chapter, really the heart of the chapter, is the reform guidance. So you'll see shortly it's a big table that you can filter by type of reform, branch of government, degree of difficulty, and just be able to go through like what is everyone talking about for this topic? What are experts like TIDS? We worked with them closely, especially on this section, to make sure we weren't missing anything. What are the key things you need to know to implement these reforms? The last I would like to highlight here is this benchmarking data. So we're working on this actually in a project now for OGP, but we wanted to at least give people a starting point for data sets for different people working on or for different aspects of each topic, like what data is out there now from partners like TI and TIDS, and who is measuring this stuff? How can you compare how people are doing, how different countries are doing? So let's do a quick demo here. If you look at the chapter, like I said, you have this little table of contents. To go down to the reform guidance here, this is what I would say is the biggest part. So as you go to each section, you can do a drop down, find out the specifics about a given reform that we're recommending. We include links as well to make sure you have all the information you need. And it has this great filter feature. So if you just want to see like, well, how do I increase civic participation in defense spending? That's this section here. If you want to know about public accountability, how do we install oversight, which I know is incredibly important, going beyond transparency, we have these reforms here. So this is really where the heart of the chapter is, like I said. We have some examples of reforms, which Joe is going to talk about more in his part of the chapter, some information on local governments, who on OGP is working on this topic, some partners, the benchmarking data, where we'd like to highlight the TIDS Government Defense Integrity Index. I know a new one is coming out soon for that, so I'll update this when it's ready, and some guidance and standards, just who is working on this, like I said. And now I'll pass it back to Joe for some information about the reforms.
Thank you so much, Christina. So I'm just going to run through some of the types of reforms that we've highlighted from OGP countries and other members, local members as well. And so real quickly, we broke it. We have, there's actually two chapters. The one that we're going to get the most on today from our colleagues in TI Defense is going to be on spending and procurement and oversight, access to information. And then we also have a chapter on hybrid threats, encountering hybrid threats, which is something that a lot of our membership is curious about and how to address that. So going quickly through the what's covered, I'll give you some highlights of the types of reforms. And those include budgets, contractor ownership, who's the beneficial owners of various contracts. We've seen cases where countries end up accidentally transferring money to countries they're at war with or that are allies of countries that they're at war with. Balancing tests for right to information, which Stephanie might talk about today. Independent audits and public advisory committees. And a good example of this was the one set up in Mexico on spyware and procurement around surveillance technology, which I'll talk about. Moving to the defense against hybrid threats, common request we get is what steps can we do to counter disinformation while still protecting civil liberties? What does that look like? Foreign political spending within a country. This is something that's widely popular with voters, but is still not very transparent in most countries. And supporting fact-checking networks, both inside and outside of government. So those are types of reforms that you see if you go to these two chapters. There's more, of course. There's role for parliaments, etc. So what do we have from the different countries? So in Colombia, we had an OGP commitment on plain language. And so you can see that there is a Ministry of Defense budget, which is in simple language and is in an open format on the website. It includes data on historical appropriations, the actual expenditures, investments, and operating costs. And they have videos to explain some of that. In Germany, they committed, but I don't think it's quite done yet, to publishing data on arms exports in a publicly available database. So it is an interesting one-of-a-kind kind of commitment. We'd like to see more of these. And then we have open defense procurement data from Lithuania. And that I think is another interesting one in that the commitment was there and it's currently a little bit tied up in a legal battle with the contractor. But we are hoping to see more progress on that in the coming days. So let's go to the next one. With countering hybrid threats, we don't see quite as many OGP commitments, so we had to look a bit beyond OGP action plans, to be honest. Sometimes the Open Gov Guide has to do that. And so in that one, we have the Estonian Cyber Defense League, which is a volunteer corps of IT professionals that work alongside government officials to protect networks and respond to attacks. There's a transparent way for doing incident reporting when there are incidents of cyber attacks. And this has been largely looked at as a model that other countries have followed. Lithuania has been, again, carrying out a national media literacy program. It's specifically in response to Russian disinformation, and it includes partnering with civil society groups like debunk.org to develop school lessons, public events, and real-time fact-checking. And this is part of their bigger defense strategy. And then Taiwan specifically looks at the election domain and measures against disinformation. And they're interested in real-time social media monitoring, extremely strict political advertising disclosure rules, and strong government and defense sector cooperation with civil society watchdogs like the Taiwan Fact Check Center. So these are examples from beyond OGP action plans. We would love to see more of these types of commitments within OGP action plans. And so we're hoping that these chapters and these examples are inspiring as the geopolitics of the world demand that governments strike the right balance between transparency and national security, or actually that they're mutually reinforcing. It's not a trade-off in most cases. So stop there. Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Joseph and Christina. Very clear, very helpful, informative presentation. Let's move on to Stephanie now. You are the lead author of both TIDS report on access to information in defense and this newly launched toolkit that we're sharing today on our platforms. So let me ask you, what was the core idea behind the toolkit, and what problems is it trying to solve, and for whom? Steph.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you for the platform to talk about it and the opportunity to create these wonderful documents for folks. So I'll just start with the ATI report, which came out in 2024, was about providing the justification for access to information. Why is it important to have information about the defense sector? What types of information? Is it important to know where defense income is coming from? The answer is yes, and the report gives the justification for that and data for that, for example, about procurement and about audits. But it was a very big document and a lot of case studies. And so what we wanted to do, you and I, we talked to the TIDS team, was to provide something that was practical and user-friendly, and helped people establish a starting point for how to put those ideas and those justifications into practice. So the ATI toolkit was born of that desire, and it starts out with 4 big questions that you should ask yourself if you want to start understanding and working on access to information. So it starts with reviewing the critical components of an ATI regime. We give 5 different components that are quite important. And then number 2, we answer 4 critical questions, which are the starting points for how to tackle access to information. And these questions are, what is the state of the legal framework? It's a very basic question, but it's really important to understand what is allowed and what is restricted. And very importantly, what falls into a gray area where you have a lot more room to maneuver and sort of provide justifications for getting access to that kinds of information. And number 2, what is the quality, the accessibility, and relevance of the publicly available information? What in practice do you actually have access to at the moment? And is it good enough quality and organized and plain enough for you to be able to use it? And number 3, the question is, how can you use this information for accountability? And we give options for that. And number 4 is, how can information access support collaboration in civil society? And the types of partners that you can work with and the ways that you can work together. So these are the 4 sort of critical questions that are answered in this toolkit. And we give 3 tools: a legal diagnostic review, an institutional mapping, and a quick reference tool. And a lot of this is based on the Tishwani principles. And here is where I can ask Christina if you can bring that up. Yes, thank you. They are officially called the Global Standards on National Security and the Right to Information. And they were put forward about 15 years ago after sort of a 2-year consultative process with experts and governments in the field of national security. And they identified, among other things within the global standards, the information that is best kept confidential within national security regimes and the information that can be disclosed and justifications for all of these types of information. And the toolkit is built around these categories within the disclosure and the public interest, and how you can find ways to get access to that, how governments can make it accessible, the different ways that you can make it more efficient and more effective to publish that information. So that's what we wanted to do with the toolkit.
Thank you so much, Steph. And I know I'm a little biased, but I think you've done an excellent job at that. And it's really provided a very helpful, practical guide. Since you are really an expert on all the dilemmas and the trade-offs that go into it, maybe you can speak to what are some of the most common misunderstandings about access to information in defense, and how does the toolkit help clarify where transparency is possible without undermining security?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the number one sort of common idea about access to information in the defense sector is that everything needs to be secret because we will compromise national security if it's not confidential. And that's simply not true. The global standards go a long way to identifying the types of information that are important to release. And some of them include procurement information, violations of safeguards, financial information, that sort of stuff. And releasing this information does not compromise national security, because the really important stuff that is about operations and is about decisions in the field and is about the sort of the new technology can remain confidential for as long as it needs to be. But the information that allows society to really understand what's going on and allows accountability institutions to really understand what's going on can be released, and it won't compromise anything. And number 2, I think a really common misunderstanding is that everything is going to be a battle when it comes to access to information, and it doesn't have to be. This stems from the fact that it's the right to information, and if it's a right to information, then you should demand it, and it's sort of an entitlement that you have to fight for. It doesn't have to be this way. As access to information has evolved over the last few decades, it's become a lot more collaborative, and institutions can work together to make sure that information is produced and organized and published in ways that are helpful to civil society, are helpful to the public in general and partner institutions, so that they can better understand what's happening. You don't always have to fight for it, although there are times where there will be antagonism because somebody doesn't want to release something and somebody wants that information. So that's part of it. But there's another whole part of it that's collaborative, and it doesn't need to be a fight. And number three, I think one other big misunderstanding is that there is little to be done in some situations. You just can't move because everything's restricted. And when governments make it illegal to advocate for access to information, that is absolutely the case. That is not often the case, though. Most often is that you have a restrictive law that comes into play, and you need to make sure that the law doesn't hamper access to information. And in that way, you can do something, you can prepare, you can do all this wonderful advocacy work and make sure you're ready for when the windows come up. You can also talk to people. You can also establish lines of communication with different departments. And we talk about this a little bit in the toolkit. Maintaining relationships and partnerships with key actors is a really big part of this. And it's not just about the legal framework, it's about collaboration and making sure that the lines of communication are open so that windows come up. When windows come up, you're ready to go. And so I think those three are the biggest misunderstandings that we sort of tackle in this toolkit.
Brilliant. Thank you. I really appreciate your point about collaborative space and really providing technical assistance as civil society actors that we are, and really trying to create a collaborative environment.
Mhm.
And actually, to segue to the last point that you made, uh, many practitioners, for example, maybe also joining today, do operate in civic environments where collaboration with the government is difficult. So how does the toolkit have a response to that? How does it help civil society actors working in access to information in more restrictive or sensitive context?
Yeah, it's a good question. And here I think I'd like to emphasize that the toolkit and the report that came out last year can work together in this way. They sort of complement each other. So when you're working in restrictive environments or when a restrictive law has come out, like in some countries, new procurement laws make everything confidential, even retroactively. So this is an incredibly restrictive space for understanding the type of purchases that are being made in the defense sector. What do you do? Well, first, you have to understand what's happening, and the toolkit can help you to identify areas of the law that need to be reformed for this to happen. They can help you understand what's actually being released, if anything. But in tandem with the toolkit, you have the justifications, both legal and societal and sort of historical, for the things that should be made public and why they should be made public, with examples from other countries that are doing it well. And so you have sort of all of this information that can be used for advocacy purposes in justifications, memos to departments, discussions with key leaders within. Um, I love the use of media and journalists for making it clear what should be happening. And you can publish any number of stories about what should be happening and what is happening in other places as examples of what can be done in your context. Understandably, it is sort of it's an uphill battle sometimes in these restrictive environments, but there are sections within the toolkit called adaptation. When you're working in areas that are sort of not fully compatible with your aims and the kinds of ways you can work around it. So, for example, if you balancing tests cannot be implemented because it's a very complicated system. It requires legal expertise within the bureaucracy. Maybe that's not even allowed in your legal framework. So balancing tests might not be the answer, but proactive disclosure might be. So you can work with different departments to come to understanding of what should be released. You can work with institutions like the Archives Law on the security classification. You can work with the Information Commissioner on being prepared and work and trying to sort of advocate within the government framework for getting things released. And the toolkit provides these sort of helpful hints in cases where you're not exactly working within a fully functional system of access to information.
Thank you so much. That's super, super clear and very, very helpful. Kyrre, Norway is widely considered a global leader on defense integrity. For example, the establishment of the Center for Integrity in the defense sector in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, really set an example many have looked up to. So, from your experience, how do you navigate the tension between openness and national security in practical terms? And specifically, as Norway, like other NATO allied countries, is poised to significantly increase defense spending, how are you ensuring that this major investment does not come at the expenses of democratic accountability and instead really helps reduce corruption risks? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Francesca. But first of all, thank you for the invite to you at Transparency International Defense and Security, whom we've been working with for a number of years, and certainly also to the OGP, the Open Government Partnership, with which I've also worked several years ago here as part of a task force in Norway, but not so much on defense issues. Well, to go straight to your questions, I guess how are we ensuring? I guess we are not ensuring, because this is very, very difficult work, but we try as best as we can, and we really had to, just to make a long story short. In my country, about 20 years ago, we had a very, very bad culture where you would see flag officers, top bureaucrats, politicians really accept bribes and join in on suppliers, salmon fishing trips or Gulf fishing trips and so forth in Spain. We're talking now back 2002, 2003, 2004. So we really had to start taking this issue seriously. And we did as best as we could. And as you said, the Center for Integrity in Defense Sector, CIDS, was formed in 2012, and we've developed along a number of different tracks ever since. But I really think let me share and be a bit more practical than the others, and certainly since we are practitioners and what we do in a government, and share with the rest of you really something about our ideas and experiences. And I think it's always at the forefront, and really a starting point when I talk is really what we call to create a culture of integrity. What do I mean by that? I often talk about that, a culture of integrity. And that really, in short, really is to try and fit a society in which trust balances control, a place where people are trained in scenarios and dilemmas. In short, where the group or the population, whomever it is, does the right thing because we do know what the right thing to do really is. And certainly there are two key terms, obviously, with and train everyone within this area in your department of government, really the two key terms of transparency and accountability. But also themes such as impartiality, conflict of interest, norms and values, and really the need for consistent and competent management are other central terms. So really the effective control mechanisms to secure them against the abuse of power. Also another very, very crucial and important element. Because we know that a clear and persistent focus on good leadership at the top is important. Because if the values and the norms of the institution are not clearly expressed and enforced from the top, they will normally not really be taken seriously from lower levels either. So really an obvious starting point, when we need to develop our understanding, and really an obvious starting point is that we all need to have a better value, and I would say a better understanding and better insight into the nature of corruption, its manifestations really, and its effects. So What do we do to avoid it really whether we're planning an operation, we're engaging in a procurement process, or if we're simply serving on a corporate board? Why are some people corrupt? What constitutes an integrity breach, for instance? What does it mean really to bribe someone? What are some consequences of corruption for society, consequences for organizations, and certainly for individuals, for each and every one of us? Because keep in mind that we really need to act now, and certainly and most definitely when we want to see long-term results, we need to do that now. And when somebody argues, and look at what's going on in Ukraine these days with a society that is institutionalized, corrupt for decades and for generations on end. And so when somebody argues that this work will at least take a generation or more, they're probably right. Because, and hence there should really be no room for postponement. So what we do, just to give you briefly before I pass it back to you, is sort of the way we see it in our society, and I think many others also. The best way really to manage these things is certainly through preventive action, and like most things in life, and perhaps as we see it, to apply and exhaust what we call a three-step approach, because we know we can never really eradicate the menace, but what we can do, and indeed should, is to try to minimize and to prevent, really prevention at the forefront. So we think these three, very briefly, this three-way approach for any society stands at the core and really should be recommended. And first and foremost, we need to pass and apply a legislation that ban corruption. And violations of these must have consequences for perpetrators. And passing laws is a starting point, but serves little purpose if we do not enforce them with principle and with vigor. North Korea, South Sudan, they have laws against corruption. So most have that. But then it takes us to the next level. The second level really is we need to strengthen our institutions, because otherwise our efforts will be futile. And non-functioning and weak institutions breed corruptions, and we know that for a fact. And so we need to patiently build our institutions and see them take hold over time, because we all really know that Rome was not built in a day. So, and then certainly we end up at the third level, which is certainly, and the most difficult one, is the one at the individual level. And that's what we're struggling so much with everywhere, that we need to change attitudes over time. We need to change culture over time, because we need to work on people's mindset and change the bad attitudes really at the individual level. By far the most difficult, and the one we're really seeing wherever we go, that every one of us must show personal integrity and professional behavior. Otherwise, we will undermine our laws and institutions. And the attitude really at the individual level really is crucial. So then just let me, before I pass back to you, just touching upon what Stephanie was talking about. In my country, we have a law of openness, essentially meaning unless material is classified or confidential, it really means that the public does have access. The starting point is that the public has access to any document, and then that the government or whomever it is can limit that access, but the starting point is that they have access to everything. And then certainly some document could be exempted, but the starting point really is but that's sort of on the practical theoretical level, and more difficult in the real world. But that has changed things, overall. But that the very delicate matters and the very difficult documents obviously are still withheld. But you do have a law that is working fairly well. That the starting point is access to information. Back to you now.
Much. Thank you. That was really very insightful. I really like your point about a culture of integrity. I really like the point that links that to the idea that we need to create a system. And this is really about the leadership to create a framework. And then sort of turning the point on its feet and say, well, the starting point should be openness. And then we should discuss what really needs to become secrecy. So thank you very, very much for it. Definitely Rome wasn't built in a day, but you need to start from somewhere, right? So maybe my last question before I open up to the public is, can you just like uh, get very practical at the more micro level and share with us if you think there are any lessons, tools, practical approaches that other countries could adopt that you have worked on personally, that you have direct experience of, or you have direct knowledge of? Maybe that in this environment of accelerating spending, accelerating procurement could actually help and really start creating this culture of integrity. Thank you.
Certainly, the starting point again really is openness. Do it in the open, and you can really virtually do anything. We see problems in every society, that be it in law firms or in PR companies and so forth. The main problem really is that it's not done out in the open. You can virtually, if you do it out in the open, you can virtually do anything, and keep it open. I mean, even if your minister receives a Jaguar, a car, that's all right, as long as he or she is open about it and not bring it home. That it's just the fact of the matter. Do it out in the open. You can virtually do anything. And the other thing, starting point is come down from your high horse, as I always say. Come down from your high horse and meet the world with humility and wonder. That we really don't be complacent. Don't be smug. Meet the world with curiosity and modesty. That's really the starting point. Oftentimes as we talk, and to be practical about this and how to do it, sometimes it's good to give a practical example. And what we do is to see what are some signs of worry if we are, let's say, entering into a acquisition process, or be it with industry or with a supplier of any kind. In short, a relationship with a customer and a buyer in a market that is oftentimes not transparent and which has large sums of money involved. As we say, people always say, yeah, the defense sector has a lot of secrecy and a lot of money. Isn't the risk of corruption high? Yes, indeed, it is very high. That is not to say that it's necessarily any worse, but the risk is higher in defense sector really than in virtually any other sector. And hence, we need solid control mechanisms. We need solid integrity, anti-corruption plans, and so forth. Very important. So, but let us use an acquisition just quickly process as a case example. For instance, in a bidding process for a new piece of material, for instance, a new driving vehicle, then we have a number of things that we need to look for really in order to and also what could be expected here of a relation between a supplier and a customer. And what should we look for if we suspect that there is something unwarranted, something shady going on? And obviously, the first and foremost, do we see some preferential treatment between the two, between the supplier and the customer? Or second, do we find that perhaps that there is some overpricing in the bidding context? That could be another sign that something is going wrong. A third point, have we detected perhaps some conflict of interest on the part either of the supplier or the customer? Those are important things. And the next one really, are there any signs that the customer is tailoring specifications to, for instance, fit a particular product of one of the suppliers that is part of the competition? And a fifth point really could there be that there is a high percentage of non-open procedures in the documents pertaining to the particular acquisition? And last, are we sort of witnessing modifications of price as the acquisition process unfolds? Those are really things to keep in mind, because it's important also that That being said, to remember that corruption and integrity breaches, lighter versions of occur in the interplay always between two parties. It can be between customer and supplier, as we just discussed, between two peers, two friends, between a politician and a public servant could take place, even between a father and a son. So it's always in the interplay between two people, and almost never single-handedly or alone. So last point, and also keep in mind, as a government, and also for others, a government plays different roles in an acquisition process and really in the fight against corruption. That is important to keep in mind, because oftentimes it sits at three different sides of the table. First and foremost, really as a regulator of industry, what's going on. And then it can sit there as an owner of industry, which is sort of at the second part of the table. And certainly as the third part of the table, really, it sits there as a customer. So in any government really is a substantial economic actor in markets that are all too often not open and transparent the way it should be. So we are particularly exposed, and hence we need to work particularly thoroughly with these issues. Francesca, back to you.
Thank you so much.
Always getting carried away, talking too much, but
No,
I hope
no,
it was useful. Yeah.
No, that was extremely useful. Thank you very, very much for your perspective. It really is a valuable addition to the conversation. I personally have more questions for our speakers, but I will first give the floor to our audience. We have two questions in the chat. I don't know if the speakers saw them, but what I will do now, I would invite all the speakers to turn on the camera, please. And I will read you out the questions that we have in the chat. And one actually nicely linked to what Steph said. The question is, how can journalists strengthen their efforts in this process? Maybe we need some support, training from strong international organizations. Maybe we need to create new coalitions, union. Thank you very much from Yasur. And then the other, Angelo, the other audience member, ask, when institutions are weak, how do you avoid reforms becoming purely symbolic and taking a tick box attitude? What helps them actually take root rather than collapse when political winds shift? And of course, both Jasura and Angelo, thank you, all the speakers, very, very much. I will let you speak maybe a few seconds, a minute each to these questions. Shall we start with Joseph in order of, or Christina actually, and Joseph in order of presentations? Please go ahead.
The first one, I don't know that OGP is directly in journalistic support, although numerous journalists take part in OGP. Because we're working on the public policy side, what we've seen successfully in some countries like Moldova is working directly with journalists who are doing fact checking and cooperating in a certain sense while still independent, but helping them to get set up with more independent systems of information, and that was being carried out before. Of course, that type of work that crosses sectors needs to be appropriately firewalled and protected and have anti-corruption controls. That will be harder, of course, in a place like Azerbaijan. And here, I think our friends at the Media Freedom Coalition have been tracking specifically which countries are taking journalists and helping protect them from extraterritorial prosecution. So there are many countries in Europe who are leading in that area and can continue to lead in that area. And I hope with shifting political winds that continues. The next one, in terms of when institutions are weak, how do we avoid reforms being purely symbolic? That, of course, is a problem, especially when we're just talking about transparency. And so just to remind you, as Christina showed you, you can filter the Open Gov guide by public accountability commitments. And to our mind, these are the strong commitments. They're much rarer, I'll be honest with you. Within OGP, they represent less than 15% of commitments that count as accountability. But this is when you actually are setting up institutions who have some power to oversee other institutions and who can. So this is making sure legislatures have oversight committees. This is making sure that auditors are fully independent and that they can take complaints from the public and report to the public. Making sure right to information commissions also have um, uh, adequate independence. And so these are examples, whistleblower protection. So it requires us, while institutions are weak, that doesn't mean we shouldn't. I mean, that is we should invest in strengthening those institutions, right? Especially as they can be countervailing forces within government. It's the only way through it, unfortunately. There's no magic other way that people have figured out throughout history to do it.
Thank you very much. Christina, would you like to add anything, or shall I move on to Steph?
Just a quick add to what Joe said about investing is also, making sure we're actually investing with resources, staff. It's something that we see a lot too, where a commission will be set up and it has oversight power, and then it has no resources to actually function. So that's, like Joe had said, an aspect that we talk a lot about in the Open Gov guide, and going beyond just transparency, but like making sure, like, how does the data get to the people? Who's disseminating it? Is civil society playing a role? So when you go through the guide, there's a lot of reforms based on that, basically, to explain that process. So just a quick note on that.
Thanks a lot. Steph?
Great. Awesome, really wonderful answers. So I'm not gonna try to reach that level of really great responses because you gave really good resources for this too. But I think in my experience, especially with CSOs, and institutions that want to work with CSOs, I think training is a really good way to get journalists up to speed. And then we're talking here about like using procurement data. Kira talked so much about the types of procurement red flags that are really important to understanding where the procurement works. But it's a technical analysis. It requires pretty good understanding of how procurement works. It requires understanding what the data is telling you when you're looking at red flags data, and it requires you to be able to put it together in an analysis that people want to read. And that's key for media and journalism. So I think training journalists on how to use the information that's out there, especially when they're sitting outside the country, as you are doing in Azerbaijan, because it's not safe to be there. You can write analysis with data that is being produced by external organizations if you can get access to data that's produced within country, and writing analyses and investigative reports that national and global newspapers will pick up. And that is, I think, how you generate external pressure for governments to sort of start moving in a different direction. So training on lots of different things, procurement being a big one, but also access to information and the types of information that would be really helpful for fostering accountability. In terms of the second question about weak institutions, it's a great question. And I think Joe and Christina had some really good answers. I think also, in my experience, the way to handle weak institutions is by establishing relationships and sort of ingraining and instituting sort of the relationships within the processes. So if you have working groups within institutions, people who will find ways to invest their time and energy and find it important to do these sort of reforms, you have a much better chance of getting things done when political winds shift. And this also matters for interagency working relationships. So ministries of defense can work with information commissioners, they can work with archives institutions, they can work with parliaments and defense committees in making sure that things move in the direction that you want them to move and sort of stand the course when political winds shift. And also relationships between civil society and key leaders. We often overlook this, but this is a great way of keeping the issue not maybe at the top of the agenda, but at least on the agenda and in people's minds. So when things do sort of when there is an opening, when there is a slight window, you're ready to go, and people have the information necessary to sort of push an idea through. And that matters for access to information, the types of information that can be done, that can be published, the way it can be published, the way that civil society can be involved, the sort of training, the technical expertise. It's ready to go if you have those relationships in place, right? So that's what I would suggest for those two questions.
Thank you very much, Steph. And another association that does very good trainings for journalists, I believe, is the Thomson Reuters Foundation, and especially on human rights and business and human rights type of topic. Kirre, any
Yeah,
thoughts?
thank you. I think, as they say, where you sit is where you stand. But I think, I mean, been working with anti-corruption and good integrity, good governance for the last 10 years. I see journalists very much as an asset, and as we do here in my country, always talking about the media really as the fourth branch of government. And I think it's one thing is teaching them, but another certainly that they can be taught different things. But the important thing really is your cooperation, and certainly as a government worker with journalists. And because in my experience, most of them mean well, most of them want to cooperate well. They went to, and they are all, some of them, very hardworking and very, very skilled to get to the very bottom of the matter. And it's really in everyone's interest that they are able to disclose when there are bad things going on. And the thing really is that if you might as well develop a good relationship with the journalist when he or she asks about access to information on delicate documents. And it's much better really to, if you are in a position to do so, to share it with him or her, because they are going to write about it anyway. And if you are not going to be very generous with that person, they are going to write about it, and you may not even if it's a case or an issue you're working on yourself, you will not even recognize the content of it, even if because you don't give them access. So in every case, really, it's much better to give journalists access and to develop good relationship and trust each other rather than distrusting, which oftentimes and that's not to sound naive. And I've been working for the government almost 30 years, but play it out in the open, be candid, share, be transparent, and everyone will benefit from that down the road. That's the first question. The second question, well, in the Nordic countries, we had the luck of really developing our institutions. I mean, Norway was under Denmark for 400 years, nothing happened. And then from 1814 to 1905, we were part in a much more loose union with Sweden, where we could develop our own armed forces, our own civil service, our own institutions with Norwegians, no longer a colony. And that was the case in all the Nordic countries, that the institutions really took hold over time. And we developed all the checks and balances and the pros and cons and what we see in many countries and many weak institutions. For instance, I was part of a NATO peer review of Armenia, and we learned there that parliament doesn't really have parliamentary oversight over the government there. Very basic things, that should be mended and managed in every society, that you have that you try and balance trust and control. You try to give access and you try to adhere to those principles of democracy, which we have agreed on in many countries. But it's common in many countries that the institutions and the state institutions are weak, and that is something really that's really to everyone's discredit and shouldn't be that way. Back to you, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Kira. Thank you very much, all. We have 4 minutes left. What I propose is I ask each one of you to give me a 20 seconds reply on what is the one key message you want our audience to take away from our discussion today. Joe, you start.
Okay. For us, openness and defense are mutually reinforcing.
Christina.
I would say don't let the perfect get in the way of the good, that you can keep building these reforms.
Thank you. Steph.
I would say access to information is strongly tied to democracy, and it will ebb and flow, and you shouldn't lose heart if things start to look terrible, because if you build a good foundation, you'll be able to move in the right direction eventually.
Thank you very much. Kire.
A few points here from the north. I would say, high ethical standards are crucial, and they need to be linked to good systems and then establish policies and plans that seek to disclose weakness in systems. That's very important. Also, the breaking laws and breaching principles of integrity must have consequences for perpetrators. Keep in mind at the end of the day that the system really takes precedent over its members, and that is absolutely crucial and something we should to live by. And then, two more points perhaps. Make our institutions really conscious of the risks that corruption and other bad things really poses to government and really to public legitimacy itself. That is vital to understand, since many breaches and a lot of misconduct happen because folk do not really know any better. Because we do know that good people commit wrongful acts and unlawful acts. It's very simple, but and then in sum, all of this really is imperative for the reputation and credibility of any system really, expecting, perhaps even demanding the public's trust. So when we spend billions and billions of the taxpayers' money, they must have faith in us, in the system. Otherwise, everything is futile. We need to earn that trust.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. This was really very insightful, very helpful conversation, so rich of great insights. And clearly, we are just scratching the surface here, but I am very glad that we are starting these important conversations. And if there is one theme emerging from this, I believe, is that transparency in defense is not only possible and necessary, but is also achievable, of course, according to different timelines, according to where you start from. But when it's guided by responsible safeguard and informed by evidence, then it is something that is within our reach. And then, of course, here leadership plays a very important role, leadership from all sides of the equation, not only governments, but also civil society and everybody else who is involved, industry included. So the new toolkit from TIDS is available on our website, along with the previous report. The OGP guide is also available on their website. And so please feel free to share them widely, use them in your advocacy, reach out to us for follow-up conversations. We truly, really would welcome those. And we will continue this dialogue through additional Europe dialogues, but also different events starting next year. So please stay tuned. We will announce upcoming events on LinkedIn and our respective websites. And so thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Francesca. Yeah,
Thank
all
you.
the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.